Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. Hi guys, and welcome back to another discussion of Salem's Lot for the Stephen King Sematary Club. We are on part 2 now. This is part 2, The Emperor of Ice Cream. And it opens up with a poem written by Wallace Stevens called The Emperor of Ice Cream. And it's a poem about death. It's, I think, a good poem, but it might be a little pretentious. So the first chapter in part 2 is chapter 8, which is Ben 3. So Eva wakes Ben up in the middle of the night to take a phone call from Matt. And when we last heard from Matt, he was sitting on his bed, afraid to go check in on Mike Ryerson. So he asks Ben to come over and to bring a crucifix, which Ben is able to borrow from Eva because her husband had one, her late husband. And, quote, he could not hold the crucifix and dig for his car keys at the same time, and instead of simply transferring it from his right hand to his left, he slipped it over his neck. The silver slipped comfortably against his shirt, and getting into the car, he was hardly aware that he felt comforted, on page 259. Ben gets over to Matt's house, and Matt tells him everything. He tells him that he's afraid that Mike has been bitten by a vampire. He's afraid that a vampire was able to enter his house because Mike invited it inside. He is just terrified. And Mike is dead, and he's laying in this guest bedroom. And I love this quote from Matt on page 261. He says, "I'm talking nonsense and I'm thinking madness." And I really like that. I'm talking nonsense and I'm thinking madness. I'm sure we can all relate to that. So Mike looks alive and healthy, just like he's sleeping comfortably in the bed, but he doesn't have a pulse and he's not breathing. So Matt and Ben decide that the best course of action is to not say anything other than, this guy is dead, please come check it out. So they call the constable, Perkins Gillespie, and they call Matt's doctor, Jimmy Cody. And Jimmy Cody is the doctor that Matt was going to take Mike to anyway the next day because Mike was so sick. So they come and they inspect him. He is indeed dead, and everyone's kind of disturbed by the fact that he doesn't look dead. He just looks like he's peacefully sleeping. They cart him off, and it says, quote, Carl Foreman's funeral wagon had come and taken Mike Ryerson's body away, and the fact of his passing left the house with him and belonged to the town, on page 277. So Ben is all worn out. He is exhausted. He's been up all night with Matt, discussing what to do, what not to do, and Floyd Tibbetts beats him up in the parking lot of Eva's boarding house. So chapter 9 is Susan 2. Susan fights with her mother. I guess she and her mother have had years and years of fighting over boys, and Anne gets under Susan's skin a lot of the time, but it's starting to lose its efficacy. She doesn't care as much about her mom, and she sees her in a different light, kind of like she realizes that her mom's just hurting her, just trying to bait her, and she's just sick of buying into it, so she has decided that she's going to move out. I think the final straw was probably when Anne was talking about how Ben was complicit in his wife's death, and implying that he is a bad guy, and just intentionally trying to ruin Susan's image of Ben and try to turn her against him. So in the middle of this fight between Susan and Anne, Eva calls to tell Susan that Ben has been beaten up and is at the hospital. So Susan kind of digs at her mother by saying, this guy you like so much, this Floyd Tibbetts, has put Ben in the hospital, so yay for you. So Susan goes to visit Ben, and he's sedated, but he tells her to go meet up with Matt and to ask him if he knows Father Callahan, the Catholic priest. He also tells her to lock the windows. He tells her that a few times, and then he succumbs to the sedation. So Susan goes to Matt's house, and remember, this is the night that they were supposed to have that welcoming party, and the three of them were going to go up to the Marston house and meet Straker and Barlow and investigate them. So Susan goes to Matt's house. She tells him her impressions of Straker because she went to the opening of his antique shop. And she thinks that he was condescending and a little cruel, but he was very sly about it, these were all just things that she was inferring from his behavior. And they start talking about the Marston house because everything goes back to the Marston house. And Susan says, quote, "Houses are only houses. Evil dies with the perpetration of evil acts." And that's on page 302. So while Susan and Matt are conversing about the Marston house, it then comes out what happened with Mike Ryerson. And as Matt is telling his story, he keeps pausing because he keeps hearing noises from upstairs. And finally, he decides that there is someone up there, and he tells Susan that he has to go upstairs because he's freaked out. And he opens the guest bedroom, which he had left open, but now it's shut. He opens the bedroom door, and Mike Ryerson is laying in the bed, and he has silver eyes that are rimmed in red, and Matt can see the autopsy stitches, so like across the chest and down into like a Y, so like into the torso. And he has canines that are white and sharp. So this whole thing where, if you've seen the movie, is one of my favorites, where Matt revokes his invitation and he has this confrontation with Mike, and Mike falls out of the window and he threatens that he's going to see him sleep like the dead. And this is all too much for Matt, and he has a heart attack and he collapses in the hallway, and Susan runs up to him and she ends up calling Jimmy Cody to come save Matt. And Susan heard the voice say, "I'll see you sleep like the dead, teacher." And while she's waiting for the doctor, she finds a class ring in front of the open window of the guest room, and she bends down and picks it up, and it has the initials of Mike Ryerson. Quote, "For a moment, in the dark, she believed it all. A scream rose in her throat and she choked it unvoiced, but the ring tumbled from her fingers and lay on the floor below the window, glinting in the moonlight that rode the autumn dark." It's on page 311. Chapter 10 is the Lot 3. So we're told about a whole bunch of town secrets, which are really, I love that Stephen King puts these little details in. They're so fulfilling. I don't know. There have been people who have murdered other people. There was a guy who everyone knew that his wife left town with a traveling salesman, but what they don't know is that she left with the traveling salesman. The salesman dumped her, and when she returned to her husband, he killed her, and he threw her body into the well on their property. So her skeleton is still down there, and everyone thinks that she just ran away with this traveling salesman. So just little things like that. There was another woman who had won a whole bunch of money in an insurance settlement, I think it was, and she put it in between the wall and the wallpaper of her house, and now she's old and senile and doesn't remember that that money is even there in the house. So there's just all these little things that I like, little details. We find out that Sandy McDougal's son, so she's the one who is abusive toward her baby, her son Randy has been killed by Danny Glick. And it said that, Danny Glick had sucked his blood and then basically threw the kid into the crib like a rag doll when he was done with it. But what always bothered me about this is, how did Danny Glick get into this bedroom? Because we've heard already in here that you need to have an invitation in order to get into someone's house. So how did the baby invite Danny Glick? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. I still like the imagery, and I love that Stephen King does not hesitate to write off children. So anyway, Sandy McDougal finds Randy dead in his crib, and we'll just ignore the fact that I don't know how that could happen. Marjorie Glick, which is Danny's mom, she's been having dreams about visits from Danny, and he's been sucking her blood. Floyd dies in the police drunk tank, and Reggie Sawyer catches Bonnie Sawyer, his wife, and Corey having an affair. I mentioned them a couple videos ago. And this was always a really tense scene in the movie, and it's no less tense in the book, but basically Reggie marches Corey out of the bedroom and he scares him with a shotgun. He makes Corey think that he's going to be shot, and Corey, he loses it, and the gun was empty. So Reggie tells Corey to leave town and never come back. So in the middle of the night, Corey's on his way to just, leave town, and he's going to wire for his savings to live off of. And he meets Barlow. Corey and Barlow are talking on the side of the road, and Barlow tells us on page 353, quote, "So I have come here to a town which was first told of to me by a most brilliant man, a former townsman himself, now lamentably deceased." And that person would have been Hubie Marsden. It doesn't say it, but I'm positive that's who it is. So before Hubie Marsden died, he had been in correspondence with Barlow. And Barlow turns Corey into a vampire. At the morgue attendants find the bodies of Floyd Tibbetts and Randy McDougal, the baby, are missing. And their little locker doors are left open, just standing open. And no one saw anyone go in or out. They have no idea how it happened. And then we get to one of my favorite scenes of all time. And this is when Danny Glick visits Mark, and he's kind of hanging outside of the second story window. And the imagery in the movie is phenomenal. But Danny is just kind of hanging out there, and he tells Mark that he's finally here to see the monsters that he was on his way to see. Because remember, when Danny and Ralphie were accosted, they were on their way to Mark's house. And in the movie, they actually go to Mark's house, and it's on the way back that they get taken and or damaged. So, quote, "The pallid face outside the window tried to smile, but it had lain in darkness too long to remember precisely how. What Mark saw was a twitching grimace, a bloody mask of tragedy." That's on page 359. So Mark is a very smart kid, and he invites Danny in. So Danny is excited because he's got another victim. So he invites Danny in, and he pulls a cross off of one of his little monster tableaus, and he swings it around and burns Danny's cheek with it. And then that sends he touches Danny's cheek with it, and that sends Danny into a rage, and he's furious, and he gets sent back out through the window. So then on page 363, we get a very good description of adult terror versus child terror. So basically, Mark is thinking about all the different things that the adults worry about in life. Like, does my wife still love me? Are my friends true friends? Etc., etc. And then it says, quote, "There is no group therapy or psychiatry or community social services for the child who must cope with the thing under the bed or in the cellar every night, the thing which leers and capers and threatens just beyond the point where vision will reach. The same lonely battle must be fought night after night, and the only cure is the eventual ossification of the imaginary faculties, and this is called adulthood." In some shorter, simpler mental shorthand, these thoughts passed through his brain. The night before, Matt Burke had faced such a dark thing and had been stricken by a heart seizure brought on by fright. Tonight, Mark Petrie had faced one, and 10 minutes later lay in the lap of sleep, the plastic cross still grasped loosely in his right hand like a child's rattle. Such is the difference between men and boys. So I really like that, because there is some sort of point where things that terrify you, you just stop believing in them. You know, like if it's your imagination eventually slows down and you disregard a lot of stuff that had originally worried you or freaked you out. And so I really like the way that Stephen King put that in here. I really like the fact that you have Mark, who faced off with a vampire and, you know, beat the vampire, and then he just kind of lays back down and calms himself down and he's fine. But you had Matt, who was so scared because he had, you know, his rational mind couldn't take it, and he had a heart attack, and, you know, they both won, but it was just, I like the difference between Mark and Matt facing off with vampires. So that is going to be it for this video. We will start with chapter 11 in the next video. Have a spooky day.